Mr. Fine, would you like to tell us your name and how you got started in the practice of law?
My name is Eugene Fine, usually with the middle initial P as long as I'm practicing law. But, and I got started, well, my father was a lawyer, and he had two brothers in business and in the theater business in the community, and I always thought that I would like to go into the theater business, and my father convinced me very astutely that I should go into the practice of law, that I would be much happier. I wasn't quite sure about that, but I did go to law school and I did go into the law firm, and I was not reluctant, but I was with some trepidation. And I wasn't too long into it, and I really began to enjoy it. The things that, again, getting off on, the thing that I enjoyed most was the relationship with the clients. I really, we had a very nice group of clients, and I got to know them intimately, and it was fun to be a part of their lives, and it was part of, it was fun to, it was very enjoyable to help them through their crises and so forth. And as someone once said, that when you're a lawyer and you have clients in trouble, you learn to peer down into their souls and so forth, and you do get to know these people very well. And I like that. I like being, I like the people that I worked with. It was very satisfying to me.
Now, the firm, you talked about the firm, was that Fine, Hatfield, Sparrenberger, and Fine at that point?
It was, when I first got into it, I think it was Meyer, Fine, and Bamberger at one time.
Okay.
And maybe that was immediately before me, but I do remember Fred Bamberger. I remember Ed Meyer very well. And it was, and then it became Hatfield, Fine, Sparrenberger, and Fine. And then ultimately it became Fine, Fine, Hatfield, Sparrenberger, and Fine, and then Fine and Hatfield, they finally changed the name of it.
When did you graduate from law school?
I graduated from law school in June of 1950. There in the class, there were at Bloomington, Indiana, at the Bloomington Law School, and there were, to begin with, they apparently left everybody that wanted to go to Indiana University Law School in. It wasn't hard to get into law school in those days, but it was hard to stay in. And there were like 150 people in our freshman class, and 3 years later when we graduated there were maybe 30. So they cut it down pretty good. Now it wasn't all, some people fell out of it themselves, some people didn't want to continue it, and so forth. It just wasn't all grades and so forth, but attrition, that's a pretty good attrition rate. And I was kind of proud that we got through that.
Were there any women and minorities in your class? Or?
I don't, there might have been a woman in there. There might have been a minority, a black person or something, but not to my knowledge. I really don't recall anything like that, of note anyway. It just, no. I never really realized there weren't, but none that I remember, yeah.
It's a different time.
Yes.
What kind of law did you practice when you first started?
Well, the law firm, my dad was what they called a corporate lawyer, a business lawyer, and the firm itself had the business end of the business community that they represented, and then they also represented insurance defense, which was when Ed Meyer did some of that, and then Joe Hatfield and his father, when they joined the firm, brought a lot of that in. My dad and I and Charlie Sparrenberger did the business part of it, the corporate part of it.
So there were two Hatfields too, a father and a son?
Yeah, the father was about retired when they joined my dad in the law firm, and But I do remember I mean, when I got in trouble a couple of times, I went to talk. No one else was available, or for some reason or other, he was just happened to be there. I had an office right next to his, and I'd go in and talk to him, and he was extremely helpful. I mean, both of the Hatfields were really great people. I mean, they were very knowledgeable, very dedicated lawyers. That was the practice of law was their life, and it was they were a good inspiration. My dad, of course, was my closest ally and my worst critic. But my dad was a very strong person. He was, and in the early days, he was very difficult for me to work with. But we grew together, and he grew to respect my opinion, and I always did respect his opinion. And we're different personalities, which has something to do with your the way you handle the client and so forth. But the approach to the law practice was the same, and we were really dedicated to helping clients. My father was one of three boys, and his father died when he was very young, and he became the master of his family and of his two brothers. And of course, when I was his son, he became my master. And it was and he was always like that. But he was I have a great feeling of gratitude for my father. He was hard on me, but it really made me a better person, and it made me a better lawyer. And I realized that at the time, but it's kind of exasperated when you think you're doing your best and you get told how bad you really are. But it worked out well.
Would you call him your mentor? Was he did he guide you through the early years? And
Yes, he did guide me through the early years. But the whole, it wasn't just my dad. I've always maintained that that law school is just the beginning of a law career or an education. That's maybe you got to know the rules of the game, but the real practice of law comes from other lawyers, whether you're in a law firm or not. And the better the lawyers that you associate with, the better you become. And I was very fortunate that our firm, not because it was our firm or my dad's firm or something like that, but the men were all very good, very excellent lawyers and very high quality people. And it helped me a great deal. There were other people that influenced my life, my early days as a lawyer. Ted Lockyer was probably one of my very closest friends in my entire life. It's indicative of maybe both of us. But the way we met was I was just out of law school at Indiana, and he was out of law school at Vanderbilt, and we met in a courtroom. And his father and my father were on the opposite sides of a major legal battle. And it was a minority stockholder suing the corporation for mismanagement, and we were the plaintiffs, and his father was on the defense, which was usually the other way around. But we sat and we observed the lawsuit together, and we commented to each other, and from that moment on, we just became extremely fast friends. I could go on. Ted was a great guy. He was a great friend. Up until I realized how good a lawyer he was and how well recognized he was, but not until he died and I heard his eulogy did I really understand how truly great he was. I knew the trivial side of him. There are many many Ted Lockyer stories I could tell. I've tried these on to my wife first, and she told me it was okay to tell them. But well, the first story I could tell on Ted was when we were, and it's a compliment to him because of it indicated his dedication to the principles of law. Now, it's going to be, you're going to have to squeeze that into this incident, but that really is the truth and the way I looked at it. I was angry at the time. But he and I were going to see Indiana play Illinois at Champaign, Illinois, to see a basketball game, and it was late in the game was late in the afternoon, and the evening before he told me, well, we had to get up at we had to be on the road at 8 o'clock to go to the game. I said, well, the game's not till 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Ted. No, we're going to go at 8 o'clock. Okay, we're going to go at 8 o'clock. So I get there I get there to pick him up, and we got to stop at Mount Vernon. Well, what are we stopping at Mount Vernon for? Well, he's got a legal matter to take care of. Well, he had a trial set in city court on he was defending a gentleman on a drunken driving charge. And before a jury, it was a jury trial in city court in Mount Vernon, Indiana. Well, if you're a lawyer, you know how ridiculous that sounds. Well, I get into there, and I'm sitting there listening to the evidence, and the accused, they saw him come out of a bar, stumble out of a bar, get into a car, go from one side. They had films of it going from one side of the road to the other, knocking over hitting parked cars and knocking over a couple of parking meters and so forth. They had him going 2 miles down the road like that till he finally hit something he couldn't get out of. And then they take him on a breathalyzer test, and they got him on the breathalyzer test. And Ted is defending this guy, and I'm thinking, God, this is crazy. I get him out of the car, and I said, Ted, you know, it's all well and good, but what did you accomplish? I mean, why would you ever think of defending a guy like that? And he said, Gene, he said he had a right to a defense, and he wanted one. And Ted really did everything to the nth degree to really try to get the guy out. And of course, no, it was like trying to move a mountain. But he was dedicated to the fact that the principle of law that the man was entitled to a defense, and he was going to give it to him. The money, most people would think that the money did it. The money wouldn't move Ted. Not ever in his life did the money move him. He had some tough times, but he did all right. But I don't know. The other story on Ted I got that's really funny, but it maybe not too appropriate. But we were free bucks in those days. We were young lawyers. We were not married. We double dated together. We went. I don't know. We'd fix each other up with friends and all that kind of thing. And then often together with that, we would call each other for help. If I needed help from him, he would help me, and I would help him, and so forth. And I had a meeting one afternoon with 3 other lawyers and my client and another client, and it was a major deal. And I told my secretary, please don't no calls, please. Just hold my calls. And I get about an hour into the meeting, I get a call, and Ted Lockyer's on the line. He says he has to talk to you. I said, did you tell him I'm in a meeting? And yeah, he said, but it's very important. Okay, let him in. He said, Gene, I've been thinking. And I said, Ted, right away, we're in trouble. So he said, no, he says, this is serious. I says, well, I said, you have to talk about it now? He said, yeah, I need to tell you. He said, well, okay, what have you been thinking? He said, well, I've been thinking that you know what? We should be dating airline hostesses. I said, well, it speaks for itself. I mean, we've laughed about that ever since. But he was a nut. One other story on Ted, and then I'll move on. But Ted was just a great person. These are personal stories. But the practice of law, I got my card, my professional card with my name, address on it. I was so proud of it. And I'm showing it to Ted, and Ted said, "Let me have it." So, okay, fine. So we're driving out to North Main, to Smitty's or something, and there's an accident on the road, and there's policemen out there and so forth, and Ted says, "Where's the guy that caused the accident?" So he pointed over there. He said, "Let me talk to him." So he goes over and talks to him. He says, "Here." He said, he gives him my card, tells him to call me. I could have killed him, but okay.
He was wonderful.
He had a human side that would not end. Besides his tremendous legal ability.
I'm going to put this in here right now because I don't know when else we'd get it in. But you remember the Children's Psychiatric Residential Facility?
Yeah.
He was the one person I knew would take that case.
Yeah.
And not charge. He was the one I knew would take it. And he did. And he won. He went on. Yeah. Got the injunction.
Well, that reminds me of another case that Ted took. A case defending Leslie Irwin. You remember that? Mm-hmm. And Ted, and that's a funny story, a legal story too. But I was for some reason or other, I was in, that trial took place in Gibson County under Judge EBA. And I think I was handling an estate, and I was waiting to present some routine papers to Judge EBA. And I walked into the courtroom, and Ted Larkier was there, a discussion with the judge concerning his fee in the Leslie Irwin case. Ted's presenting all these things and so forth, and he presenting the amount that he wants, and the judge looks at it. He says, "Yeah." He says, "Well," he says, "You did all those things, and you want to get paid for all that?" And Ted said, "Yeah." He said, "Well," he says, "Well, I had to do it. It had to be done." He said, "Yeah." He says, "I know," but he says, "Who else would have done it, Ted? Like how? Yeah, sure, you'd had to do it, but you really didn't have to do it, because it was futile and all that. I mean, and so forth." And then the judge turns to me. He said, "You didn't hear that? You hear that?" I mean. It was, I don't know, it was, it was great knowing Ted. Ted helped me. He was never too busy to help me and do anything in my entire life. I had a divorce, and he wanted to he said, "You want me to represent your wife? You want me to represent you?" I know Ted. I said, "We're two good friends. Let's stay out of that." And but there wasn't anything that he wouldn't. I retired. I had a retirement agreement with my firm. It was about a 5-year agreement. About a year into that agreement, my firm decided that they weren't going to pay me. Ted got into it, and he did a tremendous job representing me. No one else could have ever done that job. And whatever I paid him, couldn't have been enough. He just a very admirable person, and he was uplifting, and he did help. His scruples and the way he went out of his way to keep the law, I've always remembered, and I could never live up to it as he could, but no one could. But I admired it, and it was an inspiration to me in the practice.
You're the first one that's talked about him like that, and it's good to have him in these oral histories because he died so suddenly, and it was such a surprise.
There have been many good lawyers before, but there have never been another Ted Lockyer. He was just a broad, solid lawyer and an excellent human being. That's all. I don't know.
Well, he wasn't the only one. I'm sure there were other attorneys that you
Oh, yeah.
you did have stories about.
Well, you were talking about things that influenced my life and other lawyers and so forth. I had early in my career, I don't know, I had a divorce case. I don't know, a young woman had been married twice and had 3 children, and the man had been married twice and had 3 or 4 children, and now they married each other, and now they're getting a divorce. There wasn't enough money in there to argue about or anything, and Jimmy Lopp was representing the other one, Jimmy Lopp Sr. And I don't know, I walked out of a hearing just disgusted with Jimmy Lopp. I don't know what he did or something, but I was just disgusted with it. I was disgusted with he seemed like he was not fair and so forth. And he came over and he put his arm around me. He said, "Gene," he said, "you know," he said, "don't get mad at me." He says, he says, "These people got their controversy and we're trying to help them." He says, "But that's got nothing to do with you and I liking each other or being unfair, or I'm not picking on you." He said, "I wouldn't do that." He says, I'm trying to do my job, and you're trying to do your job, and we can disagree or we can agree. We got to try to agree to get them straightened out and so forth. Well, that attitude, I was always a strong advocate up until that point, and then I began to realize, I used to get angry at other lawyers, and that was very early in my career, and that I think cured me mostly of ever losing patience with another lawyer. Some people in life you just can never deal with, but you just might as well smile, because if you make a deal with them, they think that it can't be good for them if you'll make the deal. You run into that kind of thing, but I've learned to smile at that.
Did you do a lot of general practice?
No. It was mostly
insurance?
No, not insurance. I did the business end of it.
Business.
Really. Yeah. Well, you run it. The people. There were a lot of local businesses in those days. A lot of them. That whole world is sold. They sold out. They retired. The businesses are run by other people. But in those days, there were a lot of family-owned businesses that were on generations after generations, and I found that there were people business people. They do have legal problems, but in addition to legal problems, they have day-to-day problems, and they like to have somebody objective to talk to and tell them, give them a feedback, or take the other side and be an advocate or something. And I really enjoyed doing that with clients. It was the clients were, for the most part, very high grade, and it was on a high plane. I thoroughly enjoyed. I enjoyed the relationships with the people.
Did you have an attorney that you, well, let me put it another way. If you could listen to an attorney's oral history, anyone you wanted, who would that be?
If I could listen to an attorney advocate?
An attorney that you know, if you could listen to their oral history, who would that be? Who would you like to hear
listen to their
history, their oral history?
Ted would be one. Ted would be sure one. Well, again, I know Joe Hatfield's history. John Jennings was a very good attorney in those days. He was on the other side, but he was a very good lawyer. Lawyers of you're asking me in a certain way, the lawyers that I would look up to from my generation. John Jennings, Sidney Berger. Was an excellent lawyer. I personally was not fond of his burgers causes and so forth, but he was a very honest guy, as was John Jennings. These people were on the other side, but they were square shooters. Harry Dees was a great lawyer. John Early. They were trying to think of people that I dealt with a lot or had some substantial dealings with.
Were there particular cases that are outstanding in your mind?
There's, we didn't, as a business lawyer, you don't have cases really so much. Mm-hmm. There were some cases, but there were deals. There were purchase and sales of businesses were major events. Mm-hmm. They were Supreme Court type of thing and so forth, and particularly large ones. And I had a couple of those that were that stick in my memory. They were, but first of all, as a business lawyer, the thing that struck me as being characteristic of the practice, but most people don't know about, is that your biggest advocate in deals, purchase and sales, or other situations, is generally your own client. He's run his own business. He's in a deep, serious situation, and he relies more on his own good sense than you're going back to what he thinks rather than what you're telling him that the law is and what's going to happen. And sometimes you can. A lawyer's not clairvoyant, but you can see a brick wall up ahead that the other guy can't see, and you're trying to tell him don't go there. So you do have a great deal of resistance from your own client in many cases, and one of those situations is inescapable from my mind. The client. Well, my father represented the business, which was owned by the father, and then the father passed on, and he had two sons, and they became the owners of the business. And they lived in the area here. The business was not in this particular area, but they ran it from here, and there was one of the boys was an introvert and one of them was an extrovert, and the introvert was the salesman of the business, and the extrovert was the administrator. And the extrovert, the administrator of the business, came to my business. They came to my office one day, and he was smoking his cigar and very proud of himself. And they're really nice people, but he was, and he was so happy he got somebody to buy the business, and the business. $5 million in those days was a tremendous sum of money.
That was a lot of money then.
Yeah, and it's still a lot of money, but not what it was in those days. Yeah, and he had somebody who was going to pay him $5 million, and it was a New Jersey utility company that was going to do this. So we're not fooling with little boys, and he wanted me to handle the sale and so forth. And I said, well, the business owned $1.5 million. It owed $1.5 million. I said, well, Tom, I says, is the $5 million, does that include the debt, or is that just the sale for the equity? And they're going to assume the debt. Well, I don't know. I mean, is it $3.5 million or is it $5 million? Well, okay. From there on, it got worse. Then the buyers was represented by a Philadelphia lawyer. The Philadelphia lawyer, well, you know, the creed of law is that lawyers, I don't talk to his client, he doesn't talk to my client. But the Philadelphia lawyer, who was, next to God, decided that he could have perfect access to my client, and my client liked that. And Well, in every purchase and sale in those days, I don't know what the tax laws are today. They might have changed them, but there was always an inherent conflict between a buyer and a seller of a business over the form of the business, whether you buy the equity or whether you buy the assets. And it made a tremendous amount of difference to either side, whichever you go on. And this client had listened to the Philadelphia lawyer, and he was willing to do anything that Philadelphia lawyer asked him to do. And I said, well, Tom, you can't do that. You're going to give away half their purchase price. You're going to come out way short on that thing, and the other guy's going to get exactly what he wants, and he'll buy it the other way, but it's much more advantage to him to buy it the way he's leading you down. He says, well, what are we going to do about it? Well, I said, let me talk to him. So I called him, and he said, well, your client agreed to this. I said, well, no, my client agreed to this because he talked to you, but he's since then changed his mind. So he said, well, we didn't reach any conclusion. We just kind of hung up and let it hang there. And the next thing I know, my client is calling me, and he's got the other lawyer on the line, and he's telling, and he said, you listen, my client's telling me, you listen to Joe here. Joe's going to tell you the way we're going to do it, and you do it that way. So Joe is telling me everything that Joe wants to do, and my client said, yeah, now you got that, Gene? Yes, you got that thing? We'll do it that way. I said, sure, Tom, I'll do it that way. That's fine. So, then we hang up. And I knew this client pretty well. I called him up exasperated. I told him, you silly so-and-so. I said, you realize what you've done? You've given away $2 million very quickly. And I know you don't mean to do that, but that's what you've done. And I used a few bad words and so forth, and then my client hung up on me. Well, I knew my place, and I didn't exceed my place. I knew that he would call me back, and it was 2-3 days before he called me back and came back, and we had a conversation, and he realized how stupid he was to listen to this guy. Well, maybe not so stupid. He liked the other man, and so forth. So we finally get over that hurdle. We get the thing going on good course. We go up to the closing, and at the closing, there's another thing that this Philadelphia lawyer brought up, and I said, well, before we discuss this and resolve it here, let me talk to my client. And I told my client that, look, if you want to get over this burden, this is going to cost you a couple $100,000. You don't need to do this, and you shouldn't do it. It's not your burden. But if I tell this guy that, he's going to look to you and say, well, Tom, do you agree with this? And you're going to say, no, you want to make the deal, and so forth. So if you want to save $200,000, you tell him what I tell you to tell him. And then if it comes from you, he's probably not going to question it, because you've given him everything, a lot of things that he wanted. And you give him the pitch and tell him that. Is that okay with you, Tom? He says, sure. So we're rehearsing, and he's all set to do it. And then just before the other people come in, Tom reaches into his pocket there and pulls out a little whiskey bottle and takes himself a swig. And I thought, oh, we're in trouble. And sure enough, Tom, the guy came in, what are you going to do, Tom? Tom said, well, we're going to do whatever you want to do, Joe. We'll do it. So I thought, okay. Now that's the extreme of it, but that's how clients often work against themselves. I had another client here locally. It was also a very tremendous deal, and I kept telling him that he had to that he had to do the deal this way. He says, "Well, where does it say that?" I said, "Well, come here. I take him in the library." He says, "You show me where it is. I want to see the tax law that way." So I took him in the library, and I gave him about 5 books and marked the places and left him in there for a couple hours. And he came out, he said, well, I guess you're right, you know, does that mean this, yeah, okay. But he wanted to see the books. He wouldn't believe what I told him. That client, when it was all through, he sent me a book of jokes, and what did he say? He said, you know, it was a book, jokes for the head, meaning the head, you know, and he said, and he put in there a dedication to the book. He says, whenever I need a good head, Gene, he says, I always think of you, which he meant affectionately, and I took affectionately. But those deals I remembered clearly. I don't know whether they're interesting enough to anybody else, but they were fun living through.
Well, I think they connote a different time when things were on a much more pleasant level, scale.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. Tell me about, did you go to court a lot? Who were the judges when you first started practicing?
I didn't go, when I first started practicing, I went to court for trivial things. We did a lot of estate works. Estates were big business then. Judge Lensing was on the bench. Judge Lensing was on the bench at least for 5-6 years, if not more, when I was practicing law. I filed many papers with Judge Lensing, and I will safely say that I never filed a paper with Judge Lensing that he didn't find something wrong with. However petty it was, I had to go back and refile it. The other thing I remember was a judge by the name of French Clements. And Judge, I used to argue these trivial motions, motion to make more specific, and I don't know, different things like that. And they were trivial, and they were somewhat boring for everybody, but it was part of the practice of law. And I remember arguing one trivial motion like that before French Clements. And he was, well, wait a minute. He stops me in the middle of the argument. It was an L&N train, yeah. C and the I track. He said, okay, go ahead. And then 10, 15 minutes later, he said, no, oh, wait a minute, Gene, that was an L&N train and the C and the I track. And he'd go back to sleep for another 10 minutes and wake up and ask the same question. And I think other people had that same thing with him. And then the third judge I remember was Judge Reeves, and he was a circuit court judge, and everybody was scared to death of him. The few times I was there, he was damn near polite. I mean, I didn't have any problem with him, but I didn't do a lot of court work then. I never did do a lot of court work.
Were you active in the Bar Association at all?
No, I wasn't, and I really very much regret that. That's one of my biggest regrets about the practice. I was in the firm. The firm was my home, and in those days I had the feeling that because I was part of a bigger firm that I was not one of the guys, so to speak, and that wasn't necessarily true, but that was my mistaken thing about my position. And the law, I wish I had done a lot of work for the association. It's fun. The other lawyers are nice. I learned to enjoy other lawyers and their points of view and so forth. I remember Harry Dees. I was at some party with Harry Dees. I mean, it was a huge wedding party or something, and Harry was holding court among a bunch of friends, and he'd had a little too much to drink, and he was bragging about things that one would not think you would brag about in public, and I was trying to cover up for him. I said, Harry, you know, Harry said, the trouble with Harry, you know, in front of Harry and everybody else, is Harry's had a lot to drink, and Harry really, you know, these are fictitious stories. Harry says, oh, no, they're not. He says, I know. He says, I lived through those things, and I know what I'm talking about. I said, okay. I try to get him out of his own stories.
Well, he was funny.
He
I sat
was
next to
funny.
him at a lot of bar events, and
Yeah.
he was wonderfully funny.
He was a good guy. He was a very, very good lawyer.
I have heard that
Yes.
with these oral history.
Yeah.
That's the most interesting thing, is to hear the stories about the people that you thought your instincts tell you they had to be terrific. And,
Oh yeah,
and you hear
he was
good
a
stories.
very good lawyer, and he was a fair lawyer, and I was told very early in life by other young lawyers. He said that the good lawyers are the guys that are nice to young lawyers, and that worked out to be true. I don't remember anybody offhand that was. Some people were nicer than others, but I don't remember anybody that really took advantage of me or anything.
Was there one particular item or story that jumped into your mind when I called you and asked you to do this? Did you think about when you first thought about doing an oral history? What was the first thing that came to you that needed to be said?
No, other than Ted came to mind, and the first one, that one deal with the guy that gave away the farm, the first sale thing that I told you about. That I don't know. I think it's not a good story, but it
It's a good story.
but it typifies the fact that clients really do work against themselves. That's the most difficult thing I had in the practice of law, is my own clients not wanting to do what's the best for them. It wasn't that they didn't believe me. It's just that they just didn't want to do it. I don't know. It was hard to do, and they didn't want to face it. They fight themselves, really.
I understand. How long did you practice?
I practiced, I guess, I practiced about 35, 40 years, yeah. The practice was one of the great things in my life, really. I really, things happened in my life, reached a point in life that I just wanted to get away from everything. I think you burn out a little bit. I like the people that I practice with.
Now, you have a son that's practicing now.
Yes,
you
I
know?
do, yeah.
Mark.
Yes.
Okay. I'm just wanting to get that on the record.
One of the things I felt bad about is when as Mark came in, I went out. And Mark didn't have the advantage that I had with my father being there. Now, you could say that's a disadvantage, and to some extent it is, but I did deprive him of that. But he's done well, and he's a good lawyer, and he's not any of the worst for me not being there, I don't believe, but it bothered me more than it bothered him. Yeah.
But that's third generation, or fourth? Third.
Yeah, my
okay.
father, myself, and Mark.
Mark.
Yeah.
I guess the only thing I can ask you is if you could name 2 or 3 attorneys that you'd like to have back and have dinner with, because you really would like to tell them that you admire them, besides Ted Lockyer, who would it be?
Well, Harry Dees was one.
Harry?
Yeah. John Early was a good guy. Well, I'd like to, Charlie Sparrenberger in my own firm. I'd love to see Charlie and Charlie and I. Charlie was a big influence on my life. Clearly, probably more so than anybody else in the practice, because we were partners.
Then you haven't mentioned him. Why was he
I don't
such
know, because you almost Charlie was like a brother to some extent, taking for granted more or less. He was always in the next office. He was always running in to talk to me. I was running into him. It was low key stuff that add it all together, and it's bigger than all of it. But yeah, he was always there.
Was he older, or was he a contemporary?
No, he's older. Charlie was at least 10 years older than I was. Another funny story is about about a fee one time when some individual that that I knew pretty well was from, I don't know, the background is unimportant. I don't want to get into that. But the woman was an older woman, old enough to be my mother, and she came in, and her husband was evidently philandering with another woman, and she wanted a divorce. Well, I know this divorce isn't going to go through. I know you're going to get together and so forth because of the age and because of the people and so on. But okay, and I asked my dad about handling it. He said, "Yeah, go ahead, but just go easy on it. Just make her happy." So I get through with it, and they finally got back together. And what do you charge her? And well, it was a lot of time, so I charged maybe a half or a third of the time, which was maybe as much as $500. And the woman, she went nuts about it. And so I said, well, what do you want to pay? Well, she wants to pay $100. I says, okay, that's fine. You know, if that's what you want to pay, that's fine. And she was so grateful. And she says, she says, if ever I want to know Lawyer Gene, she says, I'm going to come to you. So I said, Sue, I says, if you really like me? She says, of course I do. I said, Sue, if you really like me, don't come to me. Go someplace else. So I don't know.
I think that's the struggle that the young attorneys still have today.
Yeah.
Is the fees. And I guess the last question would be: do you see a big difference in the practice today with the young attorneys, and what you went through?
I think there's more attorneys here, and I think the administrative the practice of law has changed a lot. The nature of the clients has changed a lot. Your middle class business clients are. The strength of my practice is not here today. There's business people to be found, but they're not everywhere. I think it's a different ball game today. The one thing I did in thinking about coming in here and so forth, you had something there in the notes about the cliches of today as opposed to yesterday and so forth, or what I don't know, something I interpreted it my own way, and what I wanted to say is that the guiding principle of the practice of law, and it was my guiding principle, I learned it the hard way maybe sometime, is to always take the high road. When you come to a juncture, take the high road. I don't care how, if you see two ways to go and they're both high, you take the highest, because that's your best. And if you give your best, come what may, and disaster or things come from nowhere that you never expect, if you're always doing your best and always taking that high road, you're yourself, and that's all you can be. And the corollary to that is one that, to quote Danny Glass, no good turn should ever go unpunished.
I turned to him because someone said today that Harry Dees taught him that, always take the high road.
Well, maybe that's where, I did not hear it from Harry Dees. I know where I heard it, but it wasn't from Harry Dees, but Harry Dees was a guy that always did.
And I mean, it's good. It's a wonder. You can't go wrong living by that rule.
No, that's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
that's great.
If I don't mention other lawyers, it's because I was swimming with my own firm, really, and it was a big family, and it changed through the years and so forth, and I was guided. I didn't get around as much as I should.
Where was the firm located when you first came back to Evansville? Where did you?
In the Holman Building.
In the Holman Building.
Yeah, and then from there they went to Citizens Bank, and then from there they went to the Old National Bank, and from there I took it to the
to the new building.
To the new building, yeah. I thoroughly enjoyed the practice of law. It made me a better human being, I really believe. It was very fulfilling. I did not wanted to start that way. I didn't have that enthusiasm to begin with, but it certainly grew inside of me.
Did you miss the movie theater business?
No, not really, not really. My dad was right. That's what I keep telling my son, that my father guided me. I may, you know, left to my own devices, I might have done a lot of things that I didn't do. But my son, but my father guided me. My son's philosophy is a little different. It's not as, it is more, he gives more leeway to his children and so forth. And I don't, fundamentally, I think you owe an obligation to your own to give him the guidance. You don't have to take it, but listen.
Anything else you'd like to add, Gene? Did I?
No, not offhand. It's been much more enjoyable than I thought.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
That's good to hear.
No.
You did a great job.
Well, I hope so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you both.